will now introduce Laura Jones, our Executive Vice President and Chief Strategic Officer. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Alexa, and welcome everyone to our special COVID-19 webinar. Happy Small Business Week, Small Business Month if you are in British Columbia. So in honor of Small Business Week, we've opened up our webinars to all businesses. These webinars are something that we've been doing for our members for 29 consecutive weeks now since the pandemic began. And the purpose of them really is to try and answer as many of your questions as we can. We know that you are busy running your businesses and keeping up with all of the details of the pandemic relief programs and the support that's available for government can be very, very challenging. So our intention is to help you with that. I am joined by some very capable colleagues who I will introduce to you now. So Corinne, I will ask you to share your video, and Rachel is joining us today. So Rachel is also with us, and Rachel can say hello. And so Corinne is our Senior Vice President of National Affairs and Partnerships, and really that's a fancy way of saying she's an expert in all things to do with Ottawa. She is regularly on the phone with all of the different agencies, spending a lot of time on the phone with CRA these days, Corinne, and advocating on your behalf. And Rachel is one of our business counselors, so I'll talk a little bit in a minute about what CFIB does quickly before we get into the details, because we have a lot of people who may be less familiar with us than our members are. But Rachel is one of our counselors, and so we have counselors across Canada who take your calls directly and are there to help. And what's great about that is we are hearing the questions that small business owners have directly and then feeding those questions into government through the work that Corinne does and the work that I do. And I am Laura Jones, Executive Vice President of CFIB, which means I do a little bit of everything. But I also work very, very closely with Corinne and the legislative team on the various programs. And so we'll get into that in just a minute. But on the next slide, I'm going to just share with you briefly, because many of you will be less familiar maybe with CFIB, what we do. So there are three main things that we do to try and help increase the odds of business success in Canada. Our tagline is "In business for your business." And the three things that we do to support business in Canada is we advocate with all levels of government. Obviously, during the pandemic, a lot of that has focused on the federal government with the relief programs. And as we're advocating, it's important for business to understand that it's not what I think, what Corinne thinks, what our president, Dan Kelly, thinks about things, but we are regularly surveying you for what you think, you small business owners in Canada think, and we're getting that feedback directly to government. So huge part of what we do, all levels of government. We also have advice, education, and tools, so you're getting exposed to some of that now through our webinar. And as I mentioned a minute ago, we have a helpline. We also have a website that's available with frequently asked questions, particularly with a focus on the pandemic programs right now. And the final thing we do is we negotiate great savings. So there's power in numbers, and we have over 100,000 members in Canada. And with those 100,000 members, we're able to negotiate great savings. But today we're going to focus on our advocacy and our resources as we try to answer your questions. So I'll just give you a little bit more flavor for our membership, and just mainly to tell you we've got members right across Canada, and that I think is a huge strength of ours. So on this call, I know we've got business owners from across Canada, and many of you are in slightly different positions with respect to the pandemic, depending on closures and that kind of thing. But again, we can try and answer as many of your questions as possible through this webinar. On the next slide, we like to start our weekly webinars with our members with a few quotes to lean on. I don't know anyone who hasn't been hit in some way, shape, or form by this pandemic. That's particularly true of small business owners. So we like to start with a few inspirational quotes, maybe to put a smile on your face or to draw some inspiration from. We love this one about worry is like a rocking chair. It gives us something to do, but never gets you anywhere, because of course, you know, people do. There's a long list of worries out there. Dancing in the rain. I love to dance often in my kitchen while embarrassing my children. But anyway, that's a few about dancing that we've picked. And of course, Big Bird makes everyone smile. So there's a Big Bird quote for you there too. And maybe you can draw a little bit of inspiration from some of that. And with that, we'll get into what we're going to do today. So the key things we're going to cover today is really on our weekly webinars with members, what we focus on is kind of what's new with the pandemic relief programs. We're going to also give a little bit more of a kind of general overview where we can. We're going to try and find the sweet spot around making sure you have the general, you can see the forest, but then diving into some of the specifics as you need it. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. If you do have more specific issues, we will try and get to your questions through the chat function, the question box on the side of your screen. Also, I'll just repeat that the webinar deck is there for you to download if you need it, so don't worry about taking notes. So we're going to focus on what's new, and particularly with respect to the three big announcements that happened just over a week ago with respect to the new Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy. So that is moving away from the old program to a new, different program that has many features that we think are better for a small business, but we'll outline for you what's in that. I know I was talking to a business owner this morning who hadn't even heard about it, and you're so busy running your businesses, we get that. So there's some good news in that. The CEBA update, that's the loan, the emergency business account loan, has been expanded, so we'll detail that. Corinne will come on and detail that in a moment. And then also the wage subsidy. There were there's some additional certainty around what's happening with the wage subsidy between now and December that we will share with you. One important tip that we've been giving to our members is to keep a journal, because right now there's so many things that are different, accessing government relief programs and that kind of thing. Just having a journal where you can keep some notes about the important decisions you are making right now and why we think may come in very handy just as you reflect back on this period, but also in case an auditor asks you a question about some decision you made, or you're trying to remember when was it that you shut down, or who did you talk to from CRA that gave you that piece of advice with respect to one of the relief programs. Just keeping some basic notes around this can be very useful. If you're like me, you always think you're going to remember it, and then a week later you're kicking yourself for not having written it down. So one important tip. Let's go to the next slide. And I mentioned a moment ago that one of the things we do for business owners is survey and then get those survey results out to the public and also to politicians and bureaucrats across Canada. I just wanted to give you a sample of one of those surveys. You may have heard some of these numbers in the media because we've been pretty vocal on the radio and TV and in print around the small business recovery. And so we know about 30% of you are back to normal sales or better. About half of you now are back to full staffing. Of course, that's with the wage subsidy support. And then about 72% of you are fully open, so back to normal hours. And this is something we're tracking on a very regular basis and getting to policymakers. We have lots of other things we're tracking. I didn't want to overwhelm you with survey data. And you'll see at the top, we've got Small Business Recovery Dashboard, and there's a hashtag Small Business Every Day. You may have heard about that campaign. We've got a campaign going to really encourage people to move the needle on these numbers and really think about supporting local independent businesses first. So that's a little taste of some of our survey work. And then if we move to the next slide, I'm going to ask Corinne to join us again, and she's going to walk us through some of the support bucket, the big buckets, and some of the details, and then I'll come back when we're talking about rent relief. So Corinne, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, and good afternoon, everybody. Glad that you could join us today, and hopefully we can help you with a few of the questions that you may have. So I just want to remind you, if you have any questions, feel free to post them We're used to getting questions of all types, so feel free to just go ahead and put them forward. I'm sure as we go through some of these programs, things will start to pop into your mind as well. So just a reminder, so the government, of course, has put forward a number of emergency support programs to help businesses of all sizes, primarily small businesses, however, and there are really what I would say 6 buckets of programs that are out there. There's the support programs around wages. It sort of started with a 10% wage subsidy back in March period that quickly moved to the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. That's what the CEWS stands for. And that is something that has gone through a number of iterations and changes over the last 6 months. So we'll give you the latest information on that one. Second bucket is around rent support. Laura just talked a little bit about how there was an old program that really wasn't working for many small businesses. There's a new program that's been announced. It's not yet available, but it's going to be soon. And so we'll give you sort of the highlights on that as well. The third bucket is these interest-free loans, forgivable portions, and that is the Canada Emergency Business Account. So we're going to talk a little bit about that because that has also had some improvements made to it over the course of the last couple of weeks. There's also something called the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund, which is administered by regional development agencies. So in Western Canada, it's Western Diversification, FedNor and FedDev in Ontario, ACOA in Atlantic Canada. There's a Quebec version. There's also a Northern Canada version. And they do provide some similar type loans as well for businesses that can't get the what we call CEBA loan. And we'll talk a bit more about that. A fourth bucket is income support. This one is probably the most well known. So it was known as the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB, which did end. And that has now transitioned to either the EI system if you're EI eligible, or to the Canada Response Benefit if you're not EI eligible, where most business owners who may need some income support would go. And we'll talk a bit about what that transition looks like because it's happening as we speak right now. A fifth bucket is really what we call loan support. So Export Development Canada, that's EDC, and the Business Development Bank of Canada have both provided what they call co-lending or loan guarantees to help so that banks are going to be more likely to provide loans to small businesses. It's not been heavily used by small companies, and we've heard sort of mixed experience with it, though the government has recently stated in the throne speech that they're going to make improvements to it. So we'll see where that one goes. The difference between that and the 2 above is one, interest applies right away and there's no forgivable portion. These are more like traditional loans. They're just going to be easier to get. And then the sixth bucket is the provincial programs that are out there. Every province, well, I shouldn't say every province, many provinces have provided some financing and funding opportunities, but not all. And some of them have already ended, some have yet not started, and so there's a number of them. We're not going to touch on the last 2 very much today. We'll stick to the top 4 on this list. However, we're happy to answer questions about any of these areas. If we can, we will certainly do what we can once we get to the Q&A period fairly soon.
And Corinne, I think I'm back just for a minute, just to say I think there's some detail on the provincial programs in the appendix as well, although we're not going to touch on them. And I might forget to mention this later, there's some additional detail in the appendix that we're not covering today, but we thought we'd include some of the best of slides from some of our previous webinars just so that you have the information if you it. And I'm just going to also emphasize, Corinne, something you said a minute ago, just to make sure people get this, because I'm already getting questions. I know there's confusion around this. There are a lot of the new pieces have been announced, but there's no details yet. So we're going to cover what's in the announcement and when we expect to get more details. But just to be clear, you're not behind if you don't know about what's happening with the rent support, for example, or the CEBA loans aren't available yet. They've been announced. So I just want to make that really clear for everybody.
Yes, no, thank you for clarifying that. That is important. And so the purpose of today is to get you the information that we are aware of so that when it does become available, hopefully it'll make it a little bit easier for you to decide whether it's right for you and your business. All right, so let's move to the next slide. And this is where I'm going to bring in my colleague, Rachel. Rachel certainly has done a lot of work with many of our members when it comes to some of the income support measures. So I might ask Rachel, you're going to walk through this slide and the next one, and then I'll be back.
Awesome. Thanks, Corinne. Hi, everyone. So one of the recent announcements is that on October 12th, and many of you may already know this, the Canada Response Benefit, which I like to call the CRB, opened up for applications. And so now what is the CRB? So that is income support for those who are not eligible to EI. So sole proprietors and whatnot, you guys, instead of not receiving EI, government has decided to put forwards this program to help you through this time. And so some of the questions I can, so using the CRB, you can actually receive $500 per week if your income is down at least 50% or more during the application period. So those are 2-week periods, which we like to call CRB periods. And really, you'll have to apply for each 2 weeks to get the CRB monies. And one of the interesting things about this is that you can earn up to $38,000 per year before they start to claw back the money that you're earning at 50 cents of every benefit dollar that you've earned. So yeah, let's go to the next slide. Because from BR, from our helplines, we've actually been hearing a lot of questions about what happens after the CRB, what happens to your employees or yourselves, and what do you have to do? So this is really going to depend on where you're getting your CRB or CERB, whatever you would like to call it, where you're getting that from, whether it's the CRA or Service Canada. If you're eligible to EI, more often than not, you would be receiving this benefit from Service Canada. And if you're not eligible to EI, you would be receiving this through CRA. And so if you're receiving this through Service Canada, you'll notice we've created a bit of a comparison sheet here between EI and CRB. So those through Service Canada are going to EI, and those from CRA are going to the CRB. And really, this comparison, it does show you a lot of information, but really the takeaways that I want you to remember here are, if you're receiving a CERB application through Service Canada, you will be automatically transitioned to EI. So there's not much that you have to do. Service Canada is going to take care of that for you. If you're not eligible to EI, then you will have to reapply every 2 weeks for those CRB periods. The second thing that I want you to remember as a key takeaway is the records of employment, because this is a question we get a lot. Do you have to file a record of employment to state that you had an interruption of earnings, or an employee had an interruption of earnings? And so the answer is for EI, an ROE does need to be filled out. But for the Canada Response Benefit and other CRA programs like it, you will not need that for your employee to receive those benefits. So that will be on a self-attestation form. And then the last thing I want you to remember from this slide is the comparison between when the clawbacks happen. So on EI, that would happen on every dollar earned outside of EI. So every dollar that you start to earn, versus the Canada Response Benefit, which is after the $38,000. That's when they'll start to claw back that 50 cents. And yeah, that's about it. Hopefully hopefully that answers a lot of your questions. And if not, just send us a little message in the chat.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So we wanted to start there because that is the one sort of new version of a program that's already available and out there. So, and we do get a lot of questions. It may be more relevant for your employees, but I know some folks are also using the Canada Response Benefit in order to help with their own income during this pretty challenging time. So if we move to the next slide, we are going to move on to a couple of the other announcements. So this is the what's new portion of what we're going to talk about. And specifically what was announced just over a week ago As Laura mentioned, these are still the details, many of the details for these are still to come, but we wanted to sort of get you a bit of an idea of what to expect. What the government did announce on Friday, October 9th, just before Thanksgiving, was that they are creating something called the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy to replace what was known before as the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. The difference between these two programs is that this new program, which comes effective as of October, so it will be retroactive, will go directly to tenants. The old program, you had to go through your landlord in order to get it. So a lot of people had a hard time accessing that particular subsidy, even though they really needed it. The other piece of it that's changed, which is really good, is that the old program, you had to have at least a 70% revenue loss in order for your landlord to apply on your behalf. So what we wanted to share with you here is that this new program isn't going to have that same sort of level. Basically, it's going to be based on the amount of the revenue loss on a sliding scale. So that is good news. We'll get into a bit more detail on how that's going to work in a minute. Next, I'm getting a notice here that my network connection is not bad. I'm hoping everyone can still hear me. If not, I'm sure my colleagues will tell me if there's a problem. So the next one is the Canada Emergency Business Account. That is, of course, the what was the $40,000 loan that you can get interest-free, of which 10,000 of which, or 25%, was forgivable if you paid it back by the end of 2022. They're actually going to expand that to another 20,000. So this again is not yet available to apply for, but there's going to be the ability to get another 20,000 on top of the 40,000 if you've already received it, and half of that will be forgivable. So another $10,000 will be forgivable again if you pay it back by the end of 2022. So that is good news for folks who may have already gotten a CEWS loan in the past. And thirdly, they did announce that the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy is going to stay at the current level. The Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy was supposed to start becoming less generous over the next several months, and they decided to freeze it at the current level, which is not quite as much as it had been over the last several months, but it's still better than it's going to be, and we'll talk a bit about more detail of that as well. And that amount will be in place till at least December 19th. But they are going to extend the wage subsidy until next year as well. So we'll get into details on all three of these programs right now. So if we move to the next slide, we'll bring back my colleague Laura, who has been a real champion on the rent subsidy side of the equation. Laura, and you get a lot of, you've been doing a lot of work on this particular file, so you know it's there very well. And so I'll turn it over to you.
All of the files are fun, right, Corinne? The wage subsidy. All
the files are fun, yeah.
the emergency business account and some of the provincial work we're doing. But this one has been particularly fun file, and Corinne has been working closely with me on it as well. But we were really, really happy. I guess it's just over a week ago. It was a week from last Friday, right,
yeah,
Corinne?
Friday the 9th, yeah.
The 9th, that we got this announcement that we've been really, I said I would dance on my desk when we finally got a better rent announcement. And I can tell you I was pretty close to doing that. It's not perfect. So let me start with, it's not perfect. It didn't check everything off our list, but it did check an awful lot off the list. And I do want to spend some time on this because as I've been talking to business owners, I'm based here in Vancouver, and I've been out talking to some business owners. While they're a little bit more aware of the emergency business account change, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, the rent subsidy, a lot of people were not aware of what's happening here. So a lot of you were likely need rent relief, but were shut out of the previous program either because your revenue loss wasn't high enough or because your landlord wasn't able to apply for the program. And so we had been hearing from that in a big way from all of our members, and so we were working on a better rent relief program, and we're happy to announce that this one is going to work a lot like the CEWS program. So instead of having a cliff where you have to have a certain revenue loss in order to qualify, even if you are down 1%, you will qualify for rent relief. Now, Whether it's worth it for you to apply at that level is another question. But you don't have to have that 70% revenue loss to qualify anymore. Any revenue loss will qualify you. So that was really important. A second thing that we were able to achieve here that we were really pleased that the government listened to our advice is that the payment is now going to go directly to the tenant, not through the landlord. So it will go directly to tenants once the program is open for application, which is not yet. A third thing that we really liked about the program is we were saying we need the relief to go at least through the fall and longer for harder hit businesses. Actually, the government did more than that, and they said the program is going to be available through June 2021. So that creates some additional certainty, and we had been going kind of month to month with a program that had shut a lot of businesses out. So this is much, much better. What, in terms of what we didn't get, let me just briefly mention this, because we had also asked government to, for those businesses that had not had rent relief for that previous period, so prior to October when this new program will be available, we had asked that there be a special retroactive payment for those businesses if you hadn't been able to access the old SECRA program. We have not yet been successful in achieving that. Of course, our informal motto is we never give up, we never go away, so stay tuned on that. But to date, they have not made that part of their announcement, and they've been pretty clear that that's not something that they're at this point intending to do. Couple more details. So the program is available until June, but it's going to work one way between now and June, and they're giving themselves some flexibility to design it a little bit differently between December 19th and June. So sorry, one way between now and December, and a second way, and it's a bit confusing, I apologize for that. But the way it's going to work between now and December, let's focus on that. Any business experiencing a revenue loss can claim up to 65% rent subsidy. So if you are at 70% revenue loss or above, you will get that full 65%. If you're at 50%, there's a formula, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but there's a sliding scale. So the percentage of relief that you get will go down as your revenue losses go down. There's also going to be a top up that will cover those businesses that have been completely shut down. And so that could cover as much as 90% of the rent. Now, the big question we're getting, of course, is, well, what does completely shut down mean? Am I still allowed to do takeout but my dining room shut down? What if I have some online sales, but I'm not open? So those details have not yet been announced, but we are getting your questions directly into CRA, your questions and your suggestions for how that should work directly into CRA. So that is being worked on kind of in real time right now. But what we do also know is there's a $75,000 cap per location on rent. So if you pay more than $75,000 per month in rent per location, anything over that 75 won't count. And there's a $300,000 limit per company. So if you're a company and you've got 4 locations, and so in total you pay more than $300,000 of rent, only up to $300,000 will be included, but you will be covered up to that $300,000 cap. So those are some additional details. You're going to apply for October in November. So you're going to apply for the month that has passed. And it's going to be a month to month is what we understand. And we have heard informally from our government sources that the applications they expect to be open in early November. So I know that's a lot of detail, but this is an important program, so I want to make sure that everybody gets that. And we'll go to the next slide. For just a couple of different scenarios. I'm not going to walk through each one of these, but these are some examples of how the formula could work. So, you know, for those of you up to 50% revenue loss, you're going to get 0.8 times your current revenue loss as a subsidy. So as an example, if you have a 20% revenue loss, you're going to get 16% rent subsidy. So I know you got to have a little bit of math to do this, although CRA will likely have calculators the way they do with the wage subsidy. And as my colleague Corinne said a minute ago, the programs are quite parallel. They've designed them so that they're similar in many ways. And then there's some other formulas there depending on your revenue loss criteria. And maybe in the interest of time and getting to some additional questions, I won't go through all of the details, but I will point out under number 3, if you're a business that is forced to shut down completely, we still don't know, just to repeat, we don't know what that means yet. Some other questions we're getting include things like, will it be gross rent that is covered? We think the answer to that is yes, but we have not had that confirmed yet from Canada Revenue Agency. So we're waiting for confirmation. And you'll find that this is what we try to do, is get you the information that we know and then be clear where we're not, you know, where it's still a gray zone, where it's still being worked out. But that is another big question that we're getting. Another question we're getting is, it looks like this will cover some interest on mortgage. Again, no additional details available other than they've said that in the general announcement. So I think I've covered a couple of the questions that we get. And Corinne, I want to make sure there's lots of time for the rest of our content. So I'm going to bring you back to get to the next program.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. So we'll also talk briefly about the Canada Emergency Business Account, and a couple of you have already asked some questions around this already. So here's what was announced a little over a week and a half ago or so. They are, as I said earlier, expanding the Canada Emergency Business Account by another $20,000. They're calling it CEWS Plus is what they're going to name it. And half of that, $10,000, could be forgivable if it's paid back by end of 2022. Now here's the rub right now, is that if you've already accessed the CEWS Bank loan, so you already got your $40,000, you're going to be automatically eligible for this as well. Now you're going to probably have to reapply for it, but your eligibility is pretty certain because you've already received it, and it's going to be sort of through that process. However, if you haven't yet received it, or you're in one of those categories that are still waiting to access it, it isn't necessarily going to be there for you right away. So we'll have to sort of continue to work on government to expand CEWS. We'll talk about that a bit more in a second. The one thing we do know, and this is coming from the banks, because as you may recall, the Canada Emergency Business Account, you actually apply for it through your bank, where you have your business bank account, your primary business bank account. The banks on this particular expansion part will require you to attest that you've actually had a revenue loss due to COVID-19 to get that additional $20,000. Doesn't look like you have to prove it like you will with other programs, but you will have to attest to it. And I guess there's always the risk that there may be an audit in the future. And so you need to make sure that you have an ability to show how you've had that revenue loss. We also don't know over what period that revenue loss is going to be. Is it that month that you're applying for it? Is it over the whole COVID period? So again, there's very details like that that we're still waiting for, but we do know that will be an attestation requirement as part of applying for it with your primary bank. The other good news, though, is that they extended the deadline to apply for CEWS, all of the versions of CEWS and these new versions, to the end of the year, so December 31st, 2020. We are expecting applications to open late October, early November, and we are actually hearing that we may get more details as early as next week on the CEWS extension. Now, one of the things that's happened with CEWS, of course, is that there's all these versions. There's the original version where you had to show you had payroll between $20,000 and $1.5 million, and that was the original CEWS. Well, it was a bit of a change from the original, but that was the original version. Then they created something called, for those folks who didn't have a payroll or didn't fit into those categories, they had to show that they had a non-deferrable expenses of at least $40,000 per year. That's a much more complicated process. There's quite a few problems with it. We know that. I'd be very welcoming of any of your comments on that too, as we continue to find ways to fix it. But the third piece that still hasn't been announced is CEWS loans for people with personal bank accounts. So we know a lot of businesses are running their businesses out of personal bank accounts, and they have been shut out so far from getting CEWS, even if they're legitimate businesses. even if the banks recognize them as legitimate businesses, because they have a personal bank account, or they got caught because they've switched banks right before March 1st, or whatever the case might be, or just after March 1st. These are some of the businesses that are still falling through the cracks. Government promised they would address the personal bank account issue months ago, and we still haven't heard anything, and it's getting very frustrating and difficult for those businesses. Again, we've heard through the grapevine that maybe next week we're going to hear something more on that one as well. So next week we're supposed to hear about the CEWS Plus that they just announced, but also hopefully we're finally going to hear something on the personal bank account side of the equation. Laura.
Corinne, I'm just wondering if I can sneak in a question here from Fred.
Sure.
It's right on this Canada Emergency account issue and the deferred expenses version, which we know there's been some challenges and complexities. He's basically asking, how did the deferred expenses work for home business? So payments incurred for things like telephone and utilities, gas, electricity. Can they be claimed 100%? Or only what CRA allows for home-based business?
Well, I see Rachel's joined us, and that's probably a better question for Rachel.
Maybe getting this question a lot. And I know there are some questions like this that the answer is we don't know yet because we're still trying to get clarification ourselves from CRA. But Rachel, anything that you can help Fred with on this?
Yeah, so unfortunately from what we've heard from the EDC, which is the Crown Corporation who's administering the CEWS non-deferrable stream, it sounds like proportional business use is not something that you can claim in your non-deferrable expenses. So it's not great news, but at least it's an answer from what we've heard.
Yeah, and so these are the kinds of information that help us to go back to government and say, listen, there's a whole slew of people who are home-based businesses that are now not getting anything because of this. So that's helpful information for us to have. And so, but obviously you're not the first one to ask, Fred. So it's something that we'll continue to advocate to the government to potentially expand where it's going when it comes to these non-deferrable expenses and how to define it.
And I would say that the hopeful bit of news in that, Corinne, is that the government has expanded some of these things. It's not like, you know, it's a hopeless situation. They do continue to listen to the feedback. It's always slower than what we want, but they are somewhat receptive. I'm going to sneak in one more question because I suspect, given today's scuttlebutt around and speculation around a possible election, that Sherry's question is very timely. Are these programs approved, or could these programs be put on hold if a snap election is called? And I know we've been out there pretty vociferously today saying approve these programs before any election. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, yeah, these programs still have to go through a legislative process in order for them to be sort of brought forward. And so that's the frustrating part of this. So we have been commenting in the media saying, look, we are a nonpartisan organization, so we're not trying to take sides. All we're really worried about is making sure small businesses get the help that they need. And an election will unfortunately put all that off for months. And so we can't do that right now. So our focus right now is saying, look, we need to get these legislative pieces passed so we can get these particular programs that are so important for so many businesses, especially as we go through a second wave of COVID right now to make, so it's just not the right time. And let's stop playing politics and let's just deal with what we need to deal with right now.
Yeah, so fingers crossed on that one. Great question, Sherry. Thanks for asking. And Corinne, I'll let you get back to it here.
Yeah, I think we just got one more to go through, or a couple more here. So the next slide we'll jump onto is the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which is probably the most where we get the most questions these days because it's a pretty active subsidy, as you know, at the moment. So the most recent changes to this means that there's more certainty in terms of what we can expect over the next few months for the wage subsidy, but it is going to be slightly less generous than it was over the last several months. And this is mostly due to the fact that the subsidy itself is a bit less, and there are some rule changes. It used to be that the subsidy was a set amount. If you had 30% revenue loss, you got a 75% wage subsidy. They did flip that to a sliding scale based on the amount of revenue loss that you have. So, and that's a little bit more complicated, which we'll get to in a moment. And they've also made some rule changes, which is also, I think, surprised some businesses who thought that they could cover, for example, their entire employee wages as they did sort of from March to June, and they're not able to do that anymore. You now have to actually only apply, you can only apply the subsidy to what you've actually paid your employees during the period that you're actually looking for the wage subsidy. So it does sort of kind of make it a little less generous than it was for certain businesses. So what they've done is they have frozen the current rate until the December 19th. That current rate is 0.8 times the amount of the revenue loss that you have. And the maximum subsidy you can get is 65% now. And that's with a top up, basically. This formula will be in place till December 19th, as I said. However, the wage subsidy itself will go on until June of 2021, very much like the rent subsidy that Laura was speaking about earlier, but we don't know what it's going to look like come January and beyond. We're hopeful that they'll let us know fairly soon. We've asked them to sort of let folks know, not like the day before December 19th, maybe a month or so before, so people can plan a bit more, even sooner if possible. And so most of the other rules, though, remain pretty much the same as they were. There's a couple of exceptions that I'll get to on the next slide. So if we can turn to the next slide. The wage subsidy is the only program that was announced on October 9th, but actually more details have come out since then on October 14th. And this is a bit of the details. I'm not going to go into it. You do have it on the screen. You have it as part of a handout, but essentially there's a couple of small details in regards to the fact that they're, as of the September 27th, so the period that we're in right now, the base subsidy and the top-up subsidy are going to be harmonized. It used to be that you had to base your base subsidy on your current month, and the top-up subsidy was based on a 3-month average of your revenues. Now they're going to combine them into make them sort of similar calculation. However, the safe harbor rule has been implemented as well, which will make sure that you don't receive less of a subsidy than would have otherwise in using that top-up. So if it's better for you to use a 3-month revenue average in order to get the top-up versus the current month, then you can still use that. So that's the one piece that they're going to sort of allow people to have some flexibility around if you're in that top-up category, which usually means you have to have had at least a 50% revenue loss in your business for that period for which you're applying. The only other thing, do you want me to stop there?
Well, just quickly on that, I know, Corinne, you and I were having a chat about this yesterday, and we were saying that we're hoping that CRA will actually help with that the way they have in the past, help you figure out which way is best, so you don't have to do the math and make it easy. But we're not counting on that, which is why you wanted to flag it with people, I think. And I just
correct, yes. Thank you, Laura, for that clarification. The last piece I'll mention, of course, is around furloughed employees. Furloughed employees are those employees that you may not be working, but you're still paying them a salary. And that they were sort of treated the same as other employees up until now. They're now changing that to treatment of them. They're going to try to align the treatment of those employees as if they were on the employment insurance system. So there are now some limits to how much you can actually claim for those employees. The details, again, are there, and we're happy to answer questions. Again, we're still waiting for more details on eligibility requirements here in the application process. For all of this, we expect the applications for the September 27th to October, I think 24th or 5th, it's this coming weekend, should open probably in the next 10 days or so. And then we'll probably have more answers at that point in time once we see how they're going to be calculating some of these changes. So that's it. I think it's going to be back over to you, Laura, if we go to the next slide.
Yeah, so the next slide is basically, just want to provide you a little bit of information on something else we're doing that's open to all businesses. And, you know, it became very clear to us very early in the pandemic. We typically run Small Business Saturday in Canada, but it became very clear to us that one day pushing local shopping was not going to be nearly enough. So we pivoted to a Small Business Everyday campaign that we've been running. And there's a Small Business Everyday website. There's a hashtag that we encourage people to use. And it's basically about encouraging a movement to support independent business. And on the website, what you'll find is that we want to be a one-stop shop for all the great things that are happening across Canada to support small business. And there have been bigger businesses that have been in this space. TELUS, for example, had gift cards available early in the pandemic. Royal Bank has, you know, double points. things that they're doing. So we want to make sure that those are easy for people to find. So that is there. In addition, there's some tools that encourage local shopping. There's a poster that says, we survive with your support, and thank you for shopping local. And you may have seen some of them up. They're kind of in this fun yellow and red color. But we have a new thing that we're running that we just launched this week in honor of Small Business Week, and it's a kind of a little bit of a contest. We're calling it the Big Thank You. And as a consumer, you can nominate your favorite business, and you will get a thank you box, and the business will get a thank you box. And so you can see consumers get prizes worth about $1,000, and for businesses, that's about $3,000. And it includes a small gift from every business across Canada, as well as some cash. And it's a nice feel-good campaign if you want to promote it. If you're in a business where that makes sense, there's some tools there to promote it, and just check out the smallbusinesseveryday.ca website. We're picking winners every week, and we had some sponsorship from MasterCard, eBay, Canada, and Scotia to make this happen. There have been a number of big businesses that have, stepped up and really said, what can we do to help? And these groups have been good. So we just wanted to mention that. And then we'll go to the next slide. And, we also want to make sure that as many small businesses as possible can bridge back to being to bridge back through this recovery. And so we are making our memberships and resources available for free for now, for 3 months. We'll see. Hopefully we're in a better shape 3 months from now. But if you're interested in that, we wanted to provide the link, and that gives you access to our savings discounts, to our counselors like Rachel, who can answer your calls individually, to these webinars that we do every week, and also to participate in our surveys and have your comments and thinking go directly into political leaders across Canada. We're happy to talk to you about more, but if you're one of those businesses that have thought, hey, I've always thought that I might try CFIB out, this is a great time to do it, because you can do it for free with this introductory offer. Of course, nothing's really free. We do want your contact information, so there's that. But a small price to pay, hopefully, for the great value. And then on the next slide, we'll just reinforce that also you can always go to our website, and we're trying to keep that as up to date as possible. Often the same day these announcements are going out, we're getting more details on our website. And as we get answers from CRA and other government agencies that we're talking to regularly, we're posting those answers on our website. And then you can always follow us on social media too. We're very active. So our president is at CFIB. I'm at CFIB Ideas. And there's you can follow us. Our general account is at CFIB Buzz on Twitter. Those are all the Twitter accounts. And you can find us at these places on social. And so with that, we're going to leave the last 10 minutes or so to answer your questions. And I'm going to get my colleagues to come back up on the screen. And I'm going to start with Sherry's good news that there is no snap election, that the vote was 180 to 146. So Corinne, you may have seen that in the interim as well, because I know we've been watching that. But thank you for sharing that, Sherry. And I'm going to take one on rent relief while Corinne, you and Rachel may be looking at your question box, and then I'll come to you. So Mary is asking regarding the changes to rent relief, who will apply for it under the new program? The tenant will apply under the new program. Mary, the application isn't available yet. When it is available, we expect early November, it will be the tenant that applies, not the landlord. This is the big difference between this program and the previous rent relief program. Mary's also asking, will the landlord need to provide 25% forgiveness to qualify? No, the answer to that question is no. The landlord is now out of the equation. Possible there'll be something in the application where you have to prove that that it's for rent. We don't know yet. We're encouraging CRA to keep that process as simple as possible, and a simple attestation from you is what we're suggesting. but the landlord is largely out of it. So your relief is not dependent on their giving you a rent break. And hopefully that clarifies for anybody else who had that question. Corinne, let me go to you next and see if you have any questions you want to share with the whole group.
I don't have too many. Just the one that I wanted to share comes from Sandra. I already answered to Sandra, but I think it's helpful for others to know that she said she has sole entrepreneurs who do not have a business bank account, who do not qualify for the CEWS. Is this situation changing to allow these businesses to apply? I think I did speak a little bit about this, and you know, we've been waiting for months for this particular change to happen. The government, I think it was back in May that the Prime Minister first talked about fixing this particular issue. So it's really unacceptable that it's really taken this long, and it's probably been about 2 months since it's sort of been confirmed by other you know, leaders in the government that this is something they were going to address. It's probably been the longest lasting promise that has not been fulfilled. However, we continue to raise it constantly and reminding them of it. And so this is also what we're hearing may be part of an announcement next week. So thankfully we're not going to an election. So thanks for sharing that. I did hear earlier today that it sounded like the Greens and the NDP were going to support the government. So I wasn't as worried about it, but glad to hear it's gone that way. So given that is now out of the way, we're hopeful to see legislation introduced next week. And usually once they introduce legislation, that's when we can see the real details. And hopefully we'll see also at the same time information about the personal bank accounts being included as part of the CEWS loan plan. It's likely going to have a different application process than what we've seen before. What that looks like at this point, we don't know. We've heard different rumors that they may require them to open a business bank account, but we don't know exactly what they're going to do to allow people with personal bank accounts to actually access the CEWS plan.
And we know, we do know, Corinne, that the holdup on the personal bank accounts, as you said, the Prime Minister announced it way back in May, like what the heck is the holdup? It's totally unacceptable. But by way of explanation, certainly not excuse, we know that a lot of that has to do with the government back-end systems and making it work on the systems. Yeah. And that's a group of our members that have felt very, small businesses that have felt very shut out of kind of relief. There's another group, Corinne, that I'm going to pivot now to a question from Mohammed. Another group that's felt really shut out is those that have opened new businesses after the pandemic, after 2020, because there's nothing to compare the revenue loss to. So Mohammed is asking, can he apply for rent relief and wage subsidy for a new business that were opened after the pandemic, March 2020? And I think the answer, unfortunately, is no. But is there anything else we can say? Because I know this is a whole other group of businesses that we're working on trying to get.
Yeah, in fact, Rachel and I were just talking about this earlier today because she continues to hear from a lot of business owners and members who have new businesses who are not getting anything. It's something we continue to raise as well. It's part of our petition that we are pushing our business owners to sign. So if this is something, we're going to have a new one up soon on our website, and this is going to be a focus of that particular petition as well, that there needs to be more done. The government has sort of implied over time that they may do something, but they've never actually given us any concrete idea of what, if anything, they're going to do. So we'll continue to definitely push for it. The only program that may help, and again, there's no guarantee, is the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund, which is administered by the regional development agencies. And not all of the development agencies offer this type of financing to a brand new business, but some may. So that would be the only option. Unfortunately, we did not include the list of them in this particular handout. So it'll be something that we suggest you go to our website. We have our COVID-19 section of our website, and it will have there information about the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund and links to the various agencies that offer it. And you'll have to go and see, depending on where you are, Mohammed, you'll have to go and see which development agency applies to your area to ask them if they have anything that could help.
The other thing you can do is just shoot us a quick note even now and say what help would be useful, because that's helpful for us as we advocate on your behalf. Like what would be most meaningful for you in terms of some assistance. There are a couple of questions on rent that I can take quickly because the details we don't know yet. Can subtenants apply directly? John, we don't know, but good question, and we're getting the questions and our suggestions from webinar participants from our regular member webinar, and we'll use this one as well to do that straight into CRA. So Rachel, I'm guessing that's already one that we've put to them. You're nodding your head yes, but we don't have the answer to that. And we also don't have an answer to Rob's question about if you can apply if you pay rent to your to a company that owns your building. What we do know is in the past program, they wanted some documentation and arm's length feeling there when we've had questions that are in that ballpark. But stay tuned, that hasn't been clarified yet. One other question on rent, and then I'll go to you, Rachel, to see if there are any in your pile that you want to answer, but this is a quick one. With the rent subsidy, the question is, can you go all the way back to March if you did not qualify for the last rent subsidy program? Nick, unfortunately, the answer is no. That was something we were hoping to get and did not get. So it is not, for those of you that were shut out of the first program, there's no retroactive help for that portion. And I say, just put a little asterisk there with the yet, because CFIB never gives up and never goes away, and we've been asking for that. So we hear you on that, and we are going to continue to bang on the door. But there's nothing, the government at this point has no intention of doing that. And Rachel, let me go to you and see what questions you have that you might want to answer.
Yeah, I actually have a question that you or Corinne might be better off answering. But the question is, the meeting and the event sectors have been completely closed down due to limits on gatherings. In your view, would this sector be considered shut down and qualify for the 90% rent coverage?
Mm-hmm. So this is one of our outstanding questions. We don't know what the government means by completely shut down. And so in our discussions with CRA, it does sound like they're debating this question themselves. And considering that part of the reason that this industry is shut down is because of government's decisions to limit the size of gatherings, we would think it would be included in this, and this is certainly what we're pushing for, that it doesn't have to be a full-scale shutdown. It's also when government limits the ability of a business to actually operate at full capacity that they should be considered for the 90% rent subsidy. But Laura, you may have other things to add to that, but
I think it's their intent. I think there is increasingly a recognition that there are kind of different groups of businesses. There are those, and we know in our membership about 30% are back to normal revenue and probably don't need much, if any, support, so they're fine. And then there's businesses that are kind of in between, and then there's a group of businesses that have been shut down right from the beginning of the pandemic that are in the worst shape. And I think there's an increasing recognition and desire on the part of government to help those businesses that have been most badly affected. So, you know, our hope is that absolutely you would be included and considered a shutdown. But we're just, if you sense us being a little cautious, it's because we don't want to give fault. We don't want to say yes and then have the government say something else, and we don't want to get too far ahead of what the government has in writing. But our hope would be yes, they would be included.
Well, I hope that
Rachel,
helps.
are there other questions you have in your pile? I know we're getting close to time. What we typically do, just for those of you on the phone lines, is we try and take a few more questions, even if we have to skate a little over the deadline. Obviously, understand for those of you who have to go. And then we'll just make a few wrap-up comments, and we'll do that shortly. We'll just take a few more questions. Rachel, any others in your pile?
I had one more question that I thought I should throw in there. One of you have asked for the CEWS, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which I know is really confusing. One of you has asked me, would you be eligible to use or subsidize your wage if you're a non-arm's length employee that is also an owner? And the answer to that is it depends on the way that you pay yourself. If you see that your wage, if you receive a T4 slip, then it's likely that you will be able to include your wage and subsidize it. If you receive a dividend, then that is not able to be included in the wage subsidy. So things about how you can record, how you do record the way that your income comes in, that will be important for the CRA to look at, especially come audit time. So hopefully that answers your question.
Great. Are there any more, Corinne, that I know we're all answering them as they come in as well, but are there any others that you want to answer before I wrap us up?
Sure. There's one here I may ask Rachel to help validate for me as well, but I have Connie asking about whether a financial institution can decline a CEBA application without sending it to CEBA. I think she means the EDC, when all the requirements are met. And I was in the middle of writing back to say that it kind of depends. The bank, first of all, should be telling you why they're declining, is the number one. Two, there can be some sort of technical criteria as to why the bank may decline before it goes to EDC, such as you don't have a business bank account or didn't open it prior to March 1st, or you may have an outstanding debt with the bank, which I think is another reason they can decline. I'm looking at Rachel to say, am I correct in those?
Yeah, there's just one little tweak that I would make. It's just because often these rejection letters look like they're coming from your financial institution. And really what's happening on the back end is your application goes directly to the government of Canada, and they make a decision, and your bank is really just the messenger, so they don't really have a lot of context as to why your application is being rejected. Some different banks will have different amounts of information on that, and there is a CEBA call center that you can call to get exactly the reason as to why your application was rejected. So I would definitely recommend that this person try calling them to see. I've been hearing that they're getting back to people within a day, which is really great because it used to be
good.
a week that people would have to wait. Yeah, and if you give me a second for my internet, the call center phone number is 1-888-324-4201.
Yeah, I've also suggested, Connie, that we could help you too. If you just take out a 3-month free trial membership with CFIB, you can certainly call Rachel or one of her colleagues, and we can also try to figure out what's going on. So.
Okay, there's some great other comments here from Sandra making the point about audit requirements, and we fully anticipate, Corinne, and we're hearing that next year I think the tax year is going to be kind of a nightmare to deal with. But I think we're gonna wrap it up here because I want to be respectful of people's time. So, and we really hope this has been helpful. I typically go to each one of my colleagues for a few wrap-up comments, and then we'll take it from there. So, Rachel, maybe I'll start with you. I'll go to Corinne, and then I'll take us home.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I just want to reinforce what Laura mentions. I like to share it, reinforce it every time during these webinars, but make sure you're documenting what you're doing and who you're speaking to, because on my end, I'm hearing a lot of CEWS audits or other audits coming up in the works, and it's not really looking that pleasant from what I'm seeing so far. And obviously CFIB is lobbying on that front. But having a journal and having an Excel spreadsheet really helps you showcase what you're doing and the way that you think, and that you're not trying to double dip on anything. So that is often really helpful to get a better understanding of your situation. And then the second thing is just remember you're not alone. You have now CFIB helping you, and our BR counselors. We're all great at answering and kind of finding the information that you might need. If you just want someone to vent with, we're here to listen to you as well. And then we always recommend when you need an expert, and hopefully we can give you a little bit of background before you need to bring in your accountant or your lawyer or your insolvency expert. So yeah, just a friendly reminder to touch base. And the last thing I would say is just don't forget to breathe during this crazy time.
Good reminder. Corinne, over to you for your
Great.
last.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today and for those that stuck it out. I don't know if we were able to get to every single question, but I hope we got to most of your questions. Just a reminder, too, that, try our 3-month free trial membership. You can access all of the services, including what Rachel just mentioned to you, but also, of course, our surveys, which are super important in getting into the front of legislative people who actually make the decisions. They listen to our surveys. I've been told multiple times by people in government ministries' offices that it's one of the most used sources of information in helping them make decisions. So it's really a direct voice that we provide to small business owners to the government. And like Laura said, I'm just a messenger. I don't make the decisions, our members do. And so please know that we listen pretty intently, and these webinars have become a valuable resource, just as much of a valuable resource for us as it has been for our members. And well, hopefully you can join us in some of those weekly webinars in the future. Having said all that, thank you again for joining us. I wish you all the best of luck and as things progress for the next several months.
Thanks, Corinne. And I'll just bring us home here by thanking all of you for taking the time to be on the webinar. And I hope that going forward, if we can be of some help, that you will take us up on that offer on the free 3 months. And we know many members have felt that just that helpline has been kind of invaluable, to have a place where you can call and talk to people who are in your corner and on your side completely. Like, we are 100% in business for your business. And we've been doing that for almost 50 years. Next year will be our 50th anniversary. And boy, what a way to ring in our 50th anniversary. But I'll also just come in behind both Rachel and Corinne on, we talk about on our regular weekly webinars, self-care. Brendan, who didn't join us today, but who sometimes joins us, often talks about the pilot. The plane doesn't land without the pilot, and you are the pilot. So that self-care piece is just so important. So please do that. A couple of the quotes referred to learning how to dance in the rain, which I think we're all having to do in this pandemic. Find the joy even when there's a lot of stress and worries, financial and emotional stress and worries. We're certainly hearing that from our members. But I'm a beginner at ballet, and my dance teacher said something that I thought was great this week. She said, we talk about self-care, and sometimes it's hard to know what that means, but it really is that space between you and other people where it's not all about you and it's not all about them, but you're there together in a community. And we very much feel like our weekly webinars have become that. So we hope we've given you a little taste of that in this webinar. And as Corinne said, we wish you all the best of luck, but you have a group out there in CFIB that is really rooting for you and doing everything we can to give you the best odds of bridging back to recovery. And with that, we will wish you a happy rest of the Small Business Week and Small Business Month if you're here in British Columbia. And we hope to hear from you one way or another soon. Thanks, everyone. And with that, Alexa will end the webinar.